says you have been working on your play. You know the one I mean, the one with the great screen scene in it." "Oh yes, Frank," he remarked indifferently. "Won't you tell me what you've done?" I asked. "Have you written any of it?" "No, Frank," he replied casually. "It's the scenario Smithers talked about." A little while afterwards he asked me for money. I told him I could not afford any at the moment, and pressed him to write his play. "I shall never write again, Frank," he said. I simply can't face my thoughts. Don't ask me." Then suddenly, "Why don't you buy the scenario and write the play yourself?" "I don't care for the stage," I replied. "It's a sort of rude encaustic work I don't like. Its effects are theatrical. A play pays far better than a book, you know." But I was not interested. That evening, thinking over what he had said, I realized all at once that a story I had in mind to write would suit the screen scene of Oscar's scenario. Why shouldn't I write a play instead of a story? When we met next day, I broached the idea to Oscar. "I have a story in my head," I said, "which would fit into that scenario of yours so far as you have sketched it to me. I could write it as a play, and do the second, third and fourth acts very quickly, as all the personages are alive to me. Could you do the first act?" "Of course I could, Frank." "But," I said, "will you?" "What would be the good? You could not sell it, Frank." "In any case," I went on, "I could try. But I would infinitely prefer you to write the whole play if you would. Then it would sell fast enough." "Oh, Frank, don't ask me." The idea of the collaboration was a mistake, but it seemed to me at the moment the best way to get him to do something. Suddenly he asked me to give him £50 for the scenario at once. Then I could do what I liked with it. After a good deal of talk I consented to give him the £50, if he would promise to write the first act. He promised, and I gave him the money. A little later I noticed a certain tension in his relations with Lord Alfred Douglas. One day he told me frankly that Lord Alfred Douglas had come into a fortune of £15,000 or £20,000. "And," he added, "of course he's always able to get money. He'll marry an American millionairess or some rich widow." Oscar's ideas of life were nearly all conventional, derived from novels and plays. "And I wanted him to give me enough to make my life comfortable, to settle enough on me to make a decent life possible to me. It would only have cost him £2,000 or £3,000, perhaps less. I get £150 a year, and I wanted him to make it up to £300. I lost that through going to him at Naples. I think he ought to give me that at the very least, don't you? Won't you speak to him, Frank?" "I could not possibly interfere," I replied. "I gave him everything," he went on in a depressed way. "When I had money, he never had to ask for it, all that was mine was his. And now that he is rich, I have to beg from him, and he gives me small sums and puts me off. It is terrible of him, it is really very, very wrong of him." I changed the subject as soon as I could. There was a note of bitterness which I did not like, and which I had already remarked in him. I was destined very soon to hear the other side. A day or two later, Lord Alfred Douglas told me that he had bought some race horses and was training them at Chantilly. Would I come down and see them? I am not much of a judge of race horses, I replied, and I don't know much about racing, but I should not mind coming down one evening. I could spend the night at an hotel and see the horses and your stable in the morning. The life of the English stable lads in France must be rather peculiar. It is droll, he said, a complete English colony in France. There are practically no French jockeys or trainers worth their salt. It is all English. English slang, English ways, even English food, and of course English drinks. No French boy seems to have nerve enough to make a good rider. I made an arrangement with him and went down. I missed my train and was very late. I found that Lord Alfred Douglas had dined and gone out. I had my dinner and about midnight went up to my room. Half an hour later there came a knocking at the door. I opened it and found Lord Alfred Douglas. "May I come in?" he asked. "I'm glad you've not gone to bed yet." "Of course," I said. "What is it?" He was pale and seemed extraordinarily excited. "I've had such a row with Oscar," he jerked out, nervously moving about. I noticed the strained white face I had seen before at the Café Royal. "Such a row, and I wanted to speak to you about it. Of course you know in the old days, when his plays were being given in London, he was rich and gave me some money, and now he says I ought to settle a large sum on him. I think it ridiculous, don't you?" "I would rather not say anything about it," I replied. "I don't know enough about the circumstances." He was too filled with the sense of his own injuries, too excited to catch my tone, or understand any reproof in my attitude. "Oscar is really too dreadful," he went on. "He is quite shameless now. He begs and begs and begs, and of course I have given him money, have given him hundreds, quite as much as he ever gave me. But he is insatiable and recklessly extravagant besides. Of course I want to be quite fair to him. I've already given him back all he gave me. Don't you think that is all anyone can ask of me?" I looked at him in astonishment. "That is for you and Oscar," I said, "to decide together. No one else can judge between you." "Why not?" he snapped out in his irritable way. "You know us both and our relations." "No," I replied, "I don't know all the obligations and the interwoven services. Besides, I could not judge fairly between you." He turned on me angrily, though I had spoken with as much kindness as I could. "He seemed to want to make you judge between us," he cried. "I don't care who's the judge. I think if you give a man back what he has given you, that is all he can ask. It's a damned lot more than most people get in this world." After a pause he started off on a new line of thought. "The first time I ever noticed any fault in Oscar was over that Salome translation. He's appallingly conceited. You know, I did the play into English. I found that his choice of words was poor, anything but good. His prose is wooden. Of course he's not a poet," he broke off contemptuously. "Even you must admit that." "I know what you mean," I replied, "though I should have to make a vast reservation in favour of the man who wrote the Ballad of Reading Gaol." "One ballad does not make a man a poet," he barked. "I mean by poet one to whom verse lends power. In that sense he's not a poet, and I am." His tone was that of defiant challenge. "You are, certainly," I replied. Well, I did the translation of Salome very carefully, as no